Hello class. Today we're going to talk about mobile web development. We're going to spend a little time on some history of websites from their initial development in the early 90s to where they are today, and look at some of the most modern methods and tools available for creating responsive and mobile websites. Specifically today we're going to take a look at viewport, we're going to look at media queries, and we're going to look at some responsive images. As a side note, we'll take a look at Bootstrap in another document or another video. Our textbook does not do a great job with Bootstrap. It really could be its own, its own class. There's a lot in there for Bootstrap, and it is very widely used and very popular. So we'll probably continue that into next week with more examples and more demos. But for now, we'll start out with a little bit of history and take us up into the modern day where we can see some testing of websites that are both responsive for desktop and for mobile devices. So back in the early 90s, when websites, or modern websites, were first being created, they were made for, if you think about it, desktop computers with large screens and wired connections to the internet, so they were fast connections, and that was great. Everything worked great for about 15-20 years, and things really changed around 2007 when that first iPhone came out, and now you're able to have a big screen phone. Essentially, at the time it was a big screen phone, and access websites on your phone. And if you think about it, you're looking at a big giant web page on a little tiny screen. So for it to fill in the screen, everything gets really, really shrunken down and compressed and becomes hard to read. That's where viewport is going to come in and help us with that, along with media queries. One of the first solutions was to create a second set of web pages for mobile devices. Instead of, for example, facebook.com, it would be m.facebook.com, and you would be maintaining two sets of code, one with full functionality for your desktop computers and one with a stripped down, minimalized version for your phones, which is not ideal. Managing two sets of code streams is never a great idea, and rarely goes well. Plus one doesn't look as good as the other, so you're probably not going to use it. It's not a great idea. Then comes along CSS with media queries, so we can take a look at some of the browser properties and have CSS react to different characteristics of the browser. So now you're able to get a little more intelligence in there and make your web pages a little different. And then the next really big change is viewport. And viewport allows us to take a big website, a big web page, and view a smaller portion of it, kind of like looking at it through a microscope, where you don't have to scale in and scale out. It renders in the proper sizes on your device, and you just have to scroll left and right instead of zooming in and out. And I'll show you some examples of that, some code examples I have that we're going to run to demonstrate the viewport, media queries, and responsive images. So before we can do that, let's take a look at some development tools that we have in our mobile browsers. I'm going to use Edge. Here's our Edge browser. I don't have any pages loaded in there, but that's okay. We'll get to that in a minute. And what I want to show you is, well, first let me load up a page. How about that? Why don't we load up, I've got several examples here. I'm just going to right click it on my computer and open it in Edge. And it should open, there it is. And I'll share this code online, as I do with all the code. So this is a simple viewport example. It's a simple text. It tells you what it is. It's a blue box. It's got a fixed width of 600 pixels. And it's telling us we can resize our browser to see how it behaves. Now this is just static HTML and some CSS. There's no real responsiveness built into it. So this is our starting point. This is what we're going to start with. And what I wanted to show you first, before we get too far into it, is the inspect. Let me just do it up here so you can see it. So I think we looked at this a little bit in the past, but if you look at inspect, it opens up a set of tools that we can use. And over here on the right, we can see our HTML document. And then we can expand all these collapsed items, and we can see the full text. Another way of doing it is to right-click and do View Page Source, and you can see the full text that way as well. So here is the web page that I have loaded into our browser, and you can see we have a meta tag, we have a title, we have some styling, inline styling. We have a heading tag, we have a paragraph, we have a div class with the container, and the container is the coloring for the container. So very simple page, and you could see here it is. And what I wanted to show you is that in terms of responsiveness, if I shrink it, let me get rid of this inspect tool for a second. If I shrink this and bring it back, the text resizes to the size of the browser, but the blue box stays the same. So we're not using any of the viewport stuff, and that's what we're going to demonstrate first, is viewport. So we're not looking at any viewport information. The meta tag is not there. And what it's allowing, this is saying, is it's just going to display as it was in any standard browser. So we want to look at the viewport tag. And when we start with viewport, an absolute requirement is this statement here in section 10.3.2. And this tells us that we're going to use the device's real screen width, meaning the device you're using, meaning your phone or your tablet. It's telling us to not zoom out. And it's going to make it the initial scale is 100%. So your web page is going to render at 100%, and you're only going to be able to view a small portion of it. And that small portion is because you're rendering it in. Otherwise, it would be a completely shrunken down web page, and that makes it hard to see. So let's go back to our Edge browser. And what I also want to show you with the inspect is we can simulate or emulate different mobile devices. So if we look at this little icon up here, and it's a little different in every browser, but it's essentially the same. It says toggle device emulation. So we're going to click it. So now we're toggling different devices, and you can see how my display changed. So we're displaying what is a 400 by 545 display, so a smartphone of some sort. If you wanted to, excuse me, you could click on this pull down, and you could pull down various different types of devices. You could add more devices if you wanted to, and pick them here. You can see how that was a bunch selected, some more common ones, some less common ones. You can make custom ones if you wanted to do something special. But I think with the list we have here, we have some good choices. iPhone 14 Pro Max is somewhat current. It's a few years old. It's not terrible, but you could see that here's how our text will display. And it's kind of hard to read. It's all small, very hard to read. So we'd have to actually zoom in to actually see this. And we could scroll around by moving the mouse around. But scrolling in on this is not an ideal thing when it first renders. I mean, if you went to a website and this is how you first saw, you'd probably not want to go back to that website anymore unless you absolutely had to. It's hard to read. So we have the ability to change devices, iPhone SE, smaller screen, so the text appears a little bit bigger. If I would do an iPad, all right, the whole thing fits, but it's also very, very small. Another thing we can do with mobile devices that we don't do with desktops is we change the rotation. Desktops are usually in a landscape format, meaning wider than taller, where phones are usually the other way around, taller rather than higher, the portrait version. So we can rotate, which is something else we have to take in consideration. The screen dimension can flip and change. So that's our first example, and you can see without any kind of adjustments, it's very hard to read. So let's take a look at the next example. I'm going to close these down, and I'm going to load up viewport number 2. And that's going to load up here in just a second. And here it is, and you see it looks kind of the same. Let's view the page source so we can see the difference. And you'll see with the page source, now the difference here is we have our viewport set up. So we're telling the browser to render it as if it was a smaller screen. We're telling it to use the actual device's width. Instead of assuming, this is what happens is the mobile device, unless you tell it otherwise, it's going to assume it's 1,000 pixels wide, about 1,000 pixels wide. So this is telling it, instead of rendering it as 1,000 pixels wide, which is very, very big for a smartphone, to use the actual device width. It makes it easier to read, and you'll see in a second when we do the emulation. The initial scale 1.0, that means don't zoom in or zoom out, render it at whatever the normal scale the web page is telling us to render it at. So this has the effect of making text becoming more readable. Layout behaves responsively, meaning we can change the size of it and things will scroll properly, and gives us the ability to use media queries, which we're going to get to in a little bit. So let's take a look at that. Let's get out of this part, and let's take a look at let's go to the inspect, and we will change our devices. So you see with the iPad Air, it still fits the same size as it was because it's a big device. If we switch it to, let's try the iPhone 14, and if you now render it back and forth, you can see how it behaves a little differently. So that gives us the viewport. And finally, we have a viewport example 3. I'm going to load that one up now. And this is using viewport units. So this is a similar pixel representation. Instead of measuring absolute pixels, we're going to represent viewport units as a percentage of the overall width and height. And I'm going to do a quick inspect here, or view page source here, so I can show you what the CSS looks like. And you can see with some comments in here, it's telling us to use the width and height of that first div that we see, this first div here, to be 100% of the width and 40% of the height of the screen. And this is kind of what we have here. So we can use, instead of absolute pixel representation, we can use a relative sizing. So if I now adjust my sizing, you see how the box adjusts properly. So there's our responsiveness for that display. So we have a nice responsive area of code where we can have things display properly on smaller devices. So let's do an inspect and go to our device mode, and you can see how everything fits in here. So this is kind of a bad device. Let's try a different one. You can see how everything fits in as best it can. So nothing is scrolled out, nothing is scrolling off the edges. So gives you a couple examples of how we could use the viewport to get a better mobile experience. Now, ideally, I would like to demonstrate this on an actual device, but that's kind of not really possible with what I have. So we're just going to use that emulator and show. But essentially, just seeing how it shrinks and expands is what we want to see here when we make our mobile device. And you can see it does it in both directions as well. Great. Okay, so that's a high-level overview of viewport. And again, the viewport is the visible area of a web page. It determines how the content flows and scales. It controls how responsive layouts behave. It makes mobile web pages very much more readable. And that's the important thing. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And you can interact with it without the zooming and scaling you would have to do without viewport. So instead of having a giant web page load up on your little tiny phone, you can have it zoom in on that section. Well, zoom is a bad choice of words, but you can have it render at the proper scale so you have that view of the web page in the viewport, and then you could scroll left or right or up and down to get your remaining content. Okay, so next, let's take a little look at media queries. And media queries is a way for you to query or interrogate the media device you're using for certain properties. Most specifically, width and height would be of most interest to us. So I'm going to load up another example. I'm going to load up a media queries web page. Just give me a second. I'll load that up into Edge, and we'll take a look at that. Viewport example with a media query. So it's still a viewport, but now we're adding some media queries to the CSS. Let me show you what that looks like in the page source. And it becomes a little more intelligent. So here's our viewport setup. Here's our style that we had. It's a slightly different web page. You can see essentially the same, but the text is a little different. You can see here is our CSS. That has just the light blue text, and here we have some more CSS. You can see it's also a container. Width is 100%. For full width, the background is light green versus light blue, and the font size is slightly smaller than the original size. So you have two CSS rules that follow each other. So this one executes first. This one will execute second only if this evaluates to true. So if we don't go over the max width of 600, we will execute this piece of CSS. So you have some conditions you can put in CSS, a little bit of logic, if you will, that you can use to to force CSS different rules and different options for smaller screens. And that's the goal of what we're trying to do here. Okay, so let's see how this works. I'm going to close down our view source. I'm going to go to, well, I'm not even going to go to inspect at this point. So if our browser width is more than 600, we get light blue. If it is less, it's going to change to a light green. And you can see the blue is not full screen, but the green, when we get to it, will be full screen. I mean, full width anyway. So if I start shrinking the size of this, once I get to that 600, you're going to notice that the background of the blue box is going to change color. And there it goes. So it changed to green. So now we're less than 600, now we're more than 600, less than, more than. So you can make your code be displayed differently based on these media queries. So you could have different styling and different colors and different fonts based on the screen width. Now, if we go back to our inspect and we pick some devices, you see I've already got a device here at 600. If I pick the iPhone, you see it's less than 600, the width, 357 wide by 667 tall. If I pick an iPro 14, still 400 wide. If I pick in, well, we can just rotate it. And now the width has changed, which is 932. So you can see how how it responds based on flipping, even just rotating your device will give you a different responsiveness. And if we expand our code here, and we take a look at our styling, and you know what, maybe I'll just do the view page source instead. That might give us a better view of the styling. View page source. So we have set this up for the switch at 600 pixels. That's what we're calling a breakpoint. The breakpoint is the point at which we are going to switch our display. It's not really the breakpoint you think of in code debugging where the code stops and you get to look at things. The breakpoint here is where our CSS rules are going to change based on a certain size. And you can have multiple rules for multiple sized windows. If you had a smaller window, maybe 300 pixels, maybe you want to do something different. Or maybe if you had a bigger window, you want to go and show a little bit more with some other information. So you have the ability to set multiple breakpoints and multiple rules. You just need to make sure that the order of your rules is set up properly, so the one that you want to execute and display is the one that evaluates the true last. So, for example, if this was up first, above, it may have a different result. And you could experiment with that on your own to see how that would work. But the point is, though, you can have different media queries and different rules to have different types of text displayed on different sizes of screens. So what can media queries change? Pretty much any CSS property. You can change your layout. You can do the flex box and the grid. You can change that. You can add flex boxes and grids where you didn't have them before, or remove them for smaller screens, perhaps. You can change the font sizes. You can change the line heights. You can change colors, as we've seen here. You can change visibility. You can hide menus. You can give different icons for different menus. You can have different interactions, such as hovering and pointer types. So you can have a whole series of different things you could do on a bigger screen versus a smaller screen. Okay, so let me go ahead and close this down, and we'll jump over to our next topic, a quick overview of responsive images. And as usual, I have some sample code that I will load up here. Open that up with Edge. And here we have an image of a particular mountain. I'll leave it up to you if you could try to find out what it is and send me a message. Maybe I'll put, you know what, how about this? If you watch this video and you can identify what this particular mountain is, what its name is, send me a message. I'll give some extra credit onto your final grade for that. Maybe a point or two on your overall final grade. So yeah, have a look at that and just email me what it is, what its name is. Bonus points if you want to tell me where it's located and what the significance of it is. I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so responsive images. So I'm on a pretty big monitor right now. I'm about 1280 pixels across, and you can see the picture fits in there nicely. So if I start shrinking this, it still fits, it still fits, it still fits, until we get to the point where it doesn't quite fit anymore. And you can see now the image itself is shrinking to a point. I can't shrink the browser anymore. But now you can see the image will fit to whatever size I tell it to. So we want to be able to have images be viewed properly on whatever device you're looking at. You don't want a tiny, tiny picture on a big window, and vice versa. You don't want a big, giant picture that you have to scroll in and out of on a small iPhone or tablet device. So if I view the page source, you see here's our basic image tag, our CSS rule for it. Max width is 100%, height is auto, and border radius is 8 pixels. That is of this image here. It is inside the div, and the wrapper has the size of 600 pixels. So this is the wrapper of the div tag and the picture inside of it, so we can adjust properly. There are some other methods that we can look at, and I'll jump over to the Zybooks for this, in that you have different options here for responsive images. One way, and I'm going to use the examples they have because they give much better examples that I come up with, and plus you have something to reference. is you could have different size photos to be set up on different size breakpoints. So remember breakpoints from the prior discussion. So we can have, and this is interesting, I'll come back to this in a second, the SVG tag. But you could see you could have different size images for different types of devices. So you could have this SCR set tag, and the SCR set tag will tell you when to use a bigger image or a smaller image. And you can combine that with the media queries so that if you had a max width or a min width, here's the example here, of 600, you may want to use something different or versus something bigger. So you have lots of control over the different types of images you can display and sizes. However, with this method, you need now to maintain multiple images for the same website. And maybe that's not ideal either, having 3 images having to be displayed at the same time on the same page, and then having the code detect which one it needs to display. So now you have to manage multiple images. And if you're only hosting small images, that's not such a bad thing, but if you've got lots and lots of images you want to display, it becomes tedious. So again, maybe not the best way of doing it. Another way you can manage images is by the use of a picture tag, or picture element. And you can see the picture element has similar ideas. You could specify the width, the minimum width, and what image you want to display. So you're specifying again each image and the rules for displaying that particular image. So another way of doing it, similar to SCR set, but using a picture tag, also does the job. You can also, as I showed in the code, use a larger image and then use the relative scaling to have it fit inside of a smaller div and have it wrapped properly. And you can get some image performance that way as well. Okay, great. So let's tinker around with that. I think that's in one of the labs too, so that'll be a fun thing to try out and see how that goes. And the last thing I just want to touch on, because I don't want to go into a lot of details on this, even though it is in the book, the Bootstrap section, which is, I want to spend a little more time on Bootstrap than just one small section in the Xi book, because it doesn't even really go into a lot of detail. It does go over the 12-column format, 12 columns in a row, and you can pretty much pick out which columns you wanted to use and display. I'm going to load up an image here in Edge with some Bootstrap examples, but I want to provide a little more detail and a little better understanding of Bootstrap, because it is one of the most popular frameworks right now for mobile web development. So I want to do it justice. So let me load up one last and final example for this video. And this will be a Bootstrap example. And on the surface, it looks pretty straightforward. You've got a heading, you've got 2 boxes and 2 columns. Let's take a look at the actual code. And you can see it's a little harder to read. It's a little different. So let's break it down. Let's start with the body first. We're giving it a class, P3, and all these classes are defined in the Bootstrap definition. And that's where we're loading this CSS from. We're loading a standard. It's a CSS predefined set of rules for Bootstrap, and that anybody can access. So you can certainly link to your CSS here, and now you have access to your full range of all CSS styling that's provided. And all these are defined in there. So here's our first container, and you can see where it says column 1. Here's our column 1 container and our column 2 container. And here's our main text. So jumping back and forth, our heading text, column 1, column 2, heading text, and then we have column 1, column 2. So we are putting in a row, and we're telling it how many columns wide we want it. We're telling it the headings, and if we start moving these sizes back and forth, you'll see how the columns automatically adjust their sizes until they can't reasonably fit together. Then they start stacking, and even then, when they start stacking, they start shrinking to adjust properly. So Bootstrap's extremely powerful, but in order to use it properly, you really got to get a handle on all these different classes and where they come from. So, like I said, I don't want to spend just 30 minutes working on it. I really want to spend a good amount of time on this into next week to really get a handle on it. And I want to show you just some documentation, and I'll post these links up there as well. So these are the CSS settings for Bootstrap. You see the website is getbootstrap.com, and it walks you through all the setups and all the stuff you can do with Bootstrap. It talks about the viewport. We saw that. Here's your viewport setup. Here's your media queries, so you can use your media queries. And then it shows you how we set up some examples. So here are some rows that we can set up in HTML. This is what it would look like when it rendered. So these would be your 12 columns across. And here are the classes, MD-1, column MD-1. And here's the text that goes in it. Here's our second row where we have 8 columns across. Here is our third row where we have 3 or 4 columns across. And you could really mix and match up all these different options. So like I said, without going into the details of what these different classes mean, it's hard to really get a handle on it just by looking at what this message means. So we'll take a look at that in a little more detail, but at least want to give you an example so you could read through the section in the Zybook, and I believe there's a lab for that as well. But yeah, give it a try. See how you make out with it. That's it for now. Next week we'll follow up with some Bootstrap, not too much because I know it is a holiday week next week. So I don't want to give you too much work in there, but I do want to at least have an example of some stuff to read, some reading material, and maybe a lab. I'm not sure about that yet. Anyway, that's it for now. Have a good week, and I'll see you next time.